I'm a killer, and you probably are too. Many gardeners have killed many seedlings for the same reason. And I'm going to discuss that reason and many more today, so that hopefully you and I will stop being killers. So join me as I discuss how to grow seedlings. In my first video on how to grow seedlings, I discussed the importance of light and warmth when it comes to deciding how and where you're going to grow your seedlings. Today, I'll be discussing the other important factors: the water, the air, and the nutrients. It's single digits right now, and it's snowing pretty good, but luckily, I started seeds a number of weeks ago, and now I'm ready to move to that next phase, which is taking care of the seedlings and those important factors. It's still too cold, and the weather won't really cooperate as far as growing the plants outside. So I'm lucky that I have those plants growing inside, and I'd much rather be in than out right now. So let's go inside. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott. It's much warmer in here, and the plants behind me are happy because of that. Let's get right into it. I said I was a killer, and you probably are too. How is it that we kill plants that we want to grow? Well, we kill them with kindness. We think that if we give them what they want in excess, it'll make them happier. When really, the more of the good is bad. The first way we kill with kindness is in how we water the seedlings. Believe it or not, the number one reason that seedlings die is because they're overwatered, followed closely behind by underwatering. So of the 5 key factors that I've identified in the first video and this one, water really may be the most critical component when it comes to growing seedlings. You really need to think about how you water. And even in the making of this video, I've made some mistakes. Some of them have been intentional so that I can show you what happens. But even when trying to get it right, I often have trouble too. You want the soil to be evenly moist during the entire life cycle of the seedlings. Not dry, not soggy, just moist. Think about the towel after you take a shower and towel off. It's damp. That's the way the soil should be. And that's relatively easy to attain early in the life cycle, because you probably still have that plastic covering over your pot or your flat, the one you had in place when you were growing your seeds. But at some point you have to take that plastic off, because if you leave it in place too long, as you start to water, the humidity builds up and the soil ends up getting too wet. After a week, it looks like all of these onions and leeks have germinated. So I'll take the cover off. I still want the surface to remain moist, but I don't need all that high humidity anymore. And this will help cut down on any fungus or mold that might grow on the wet surface. It's about that 1 week point after the seed has germinated that I begin to take the plastic cover off. Sometimes it might be a few days before, sometimes it might be a few days after. It depends on the moisture level at the surface of the soil. If it's moist, I might keep the cover on for another day. If it's too wet, I definitely take the cover off to allow the opportunity for the soil to dry out a little bit. And if the soil is dry, then I'll add some more water and keep the cover on. The reason that the surface of the soil and its moisture level is so important is because of damping off disease. That's caused by a fungal-like organism that strangles and kills the plant. You look at it one day and everything will be fine. You come back the next day and it looks like someone came through with a chainsaw in a forest, and the seedlings can be lying on the soil surface because it got too wet and the fungus developed and killed the plant. That's what you're trying to avoid. Your primary method of watering should be to water from below the surface of the soil. This way, your growing medium will soak up the water, and all of the soil should be relatively evenly moist, though the bottom-most will be the wettest and the top will be the driest. If the soil surface is dry, water from the bottom and allow the soil to soak up the water and see if that relieves the dryness at the surface. If it doesn't, then you should take a spray bottle and just spray the surface so it stays evenly moist. I'll often do both at the same time. I'll water from below and I'll spritz at the top just to kind of get the soil wet from both directions. When the plants are small, I recommend using a spray bottle to water and dampen the soil. If you use a much bigger watering can, you run the risk of actually causing all these little plants to flop over, and that might not be healthy for the plants. If you're using soil blocks for your seedlings, I recommend watering around the edges so that the cardboard will soak up the water. And if the top begins to dry out a little bit, definitely just a spray. You don't want to pour water directly on any of these cubes because it might dissolve the whole thing. These peat pots are a nice option for growing seedlings, but you need to treat the pot just like you would the soil. Both the pot and the soil need to remain moist. So I'll often soak them in water just so the pot starts to get a little bit moist before I put the soil in. And then once the plants are growing in the pot, I'll continue to water the same way from the bottom, with the pot always being moist and the soil inside always being moist. There really isn't a lot of difference between too little water and too much water, and this is where experience comes in. You're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn a lot of lessons. Much of it has to deal with the size of the pot or the little cell that the plant is growing in. The smaller the cell or the smaller the pot, the less water it takes to moisten the soil. The bigger the pot, the more water it takes to moisten the soil. So keep that in mind as you add water. You may only need a spritz when the soil is just an inch thick. You may need a lot of water when you're dealing with a pot that might be 3 inches deep. You want to check on the condition of the moisture level in your soil regularly, and you may need to raise the light to do this because the plants that are at the front may look fine and you might not see the plants at the back that don't look so good. So look for the obvious signs of wilt and try to get those plants watered right away. And if one of the plants is too dry, chances are the other plants are probably close to being too dry. So might as well give them a drink at the same time. This is the same plant the next morning. You can see how it recovered quite well from that extra dose of water. It works pretty well if you catch it in time. Just make sure you catch it in time. It does take a while to figure it all out, and you will make mistakes along the way. It's okay if it's too wet on one day or too dry on one day. Just try to make the average evenly moist. If it's dry, water. If it's wet, don't water. It's pretty much that simple, but do check every day, multiple times a day, to see how your plants are doing. And I've spent a lot of time talking about water because it really is the most important factor. Everything else can be right, but if the water is wrong, you're going to have problems. Relax. Don't worry too much about it. Just pay attention. Now let's move on to the last two factors that are important for growing seedlings. The first being air. And it's pretty simple and it doesn't take long to discuss. First, plants need carbon dioxide. So as long as you can provide carbon dioxide to your plants, they'll grow. Since it's all around us in the air, that's a no-brainer. You're already taking care of that whether you want to or not. The second factor is a little more important, and this has to deal with the airflow around the growing seedlings. If you have too many seedlings growing too close together, what could happen is the creation of a very high humidity environment. And in that environment, you have the possibility of bacteria and fungal growth that might not be good for the plants. How do you prevent that? Well, give your plants room to grow, air around them, enough air to circulate through all of the leaves so that they don't stay wet, that it's not high humidity, and you won't have bacterial and fungal problems. And then there's a third factor when it comes to air. There have been some studies that have shown that when air blows across the plants, it can actually make the stems a little bit stronger. So occasionally, maybe turn a fan on in your grow room so that the seedlings can flutter a little bit. That might make the stems a little bit stronger. But as far as air is concerned, that's all you really need to know about it. The fifth and final factor I'll be discussing when it comes to growing seedlings deals with the nutrients. And I suspect I'll have a lot of questions about this, so don't hesitate to ask a question below in the comments, or feel free to comment if you disagree with what I'm about to say, because there isn't one set way to do it. There are a lot of people that fertilize or add nutrients to their seedlings in a number of different ways. I prefer to have my own potting soil mix that includes a nitrogen and a phosphorus component, and occasionally I'll add a potassium component. And that's usually good enough, where the soil takes care of all the nutrient needs of the plant, and you don't need to fertilize at all. Check the bag of potting soil that you're using if you're using a purchased bag, because you might not know there's already fertilizer in it, and it's required to be on the package label, so look for it. If the soil has a fertilizer in it because you made it yourself or because you bought it, you really don't need to add fertilizer at any point of the growing of the seedling. And this is where I run into conflict with many other growers. There are many growers that think you should be fertilizing regularly. I don't. I see these seedlings as being in the pots or their containers temporarily before they go outside. And a little bit of fertilizer in the soil is enough. But if your soil mix doesn't have fertilizer, then yes, we need to think about adding nutrients to whatever soilless mix we're using so that the seedlings can grow. The main reason I don't like to add a lot of fertilizer to my growing seedlings is because just like having too much water can be bad for the plants, too much fertilizer, too many nutrients can also be bad for these little seedlings. First, if you have too much fertilizer, you can actually burn the roots and even burn the plant if you spray it on. This causes cellular damage, stunts the growth of the plant, and it's not a good thing. Second, too much fertilizer causes the little seedlings to grow quickly. That's the green part of the plant that's growing quickly. The roots may not catch up. And so what you might have is a tall, spindly, very green plant, but a root system that can't support all of the nutrient needs. So it's like you take your kids out to the movies and you feed them full of candy, and then they get home and crash. The same thing happens to plants. All that fertilizer makes them grow, 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 grow. And the roots can't keep up, and the plant crashes. It just doesn't grow well from that point on. That's why I don't like to use a lot of fertilizers, because kind of like the water, it needs to be done just right. To avoid fertilizer burn when you're adding nutrients, you should not put full strength fertilizer mixtures on the growing seedlings. Cut the fertilizer recommendations in half. I like to use organic fertilizers. This is a fish fertilizer, basically just ground up fish. And it recommends that you use 2 tablespoons of this mix to a gallon of water. That's going to be too strong for the seedlings. So I would recommend in a case like this using 1 tablespoon per gallon of water. That's half strength. And to be on the safe side, I would even use less than 1 tablespoon per gallon of water just to avoid any problems of over-fertilization. If you do this about once a week during the growing period of the seedling, you should be fine. But that's not during the entire growth period of the seedling. If you fertilize too soon, you run into some of those problems I discussed earlier. So what I like to do is wait until the seedlings have their 3rd set of true leaves. By that point, the root system should be developed enough. You've got at least 3 full sets of leaves, so the rest of the photosynthesis and growth can continue with no problems. Now when you fertilize, it's adding nutrients at a point that the plant needs it. Right before you put the plant outside, you should probably also consider adding a little boost of nutrients just to strengthen the plant, because it will be shocked at transplant. Other than that, I'm not worrying too much about adding the nutrients because I do it in the soil. And that brings us to a slightly broader discussion of soil, because it's the soil that provides almost all of the nutrients that the seedlings need. And if your soil is good, then you probably don't need any additional fertilizer. My mix and most of the other potting mixes that you'll buy have compost or worm castings or something else in the soil mix that provides nutrients for the seedlings. That's enough. With the soil providing nutrients, you don't need an additional fertilizer boost. In fact, that extra fertilizer can cause over-fertilization. I've grown thousands of seedlings over the years, and in almost every single case, I did not add fertilizer because the soil was good enough. It included the nutrients. It included those things like the blood meal or the bone meal or the compost or the worm castings. That's where I put my focus, not on the fertilization. If you disagree with that or have questions, please let me know below, because I understand that different gardeners do it differently. But as long as you focus on all 5 of those things that I've covered in the first video and now this video, your seedlings should be fine. And they'll grow to a point that they'll be ready for you to pot up or put outside. And if you have any questions from either video, please let me know below. Or any comments about the 2 videos, please let me know below. If you want to continue to receive some of this gardening information, then subscribe to the Gardener Scott channel if you haven't already done so. And if you like this video, you can give me a thumbs up and share it. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.